I'm Rebecca Winn for Devil's Digest here with publisher Rabino, and we will be looking at this week's matchup against Oregon State. So obviously ASU really struggled against Utah. What do you think the team took away from that, and what do you think they'll have to do to not make those same mistakes on offense especially?
So many times in football you hear about team character and resiliency, and I know it's cliches, a lot of people roll their eyes when they hear that stuff, but I think Arizona State was definitely able to prove that, just like it did against Wisconsin, also proved that against Utah, and winning a very close game. Maybe a game when you look at the first half, or even the third quarter for that matter, maybe didn't have a business winning that game at all. So I think it was good maybe for a change to go and win a game from coming behind to prove yourself that you can do that. Yes, you have three very, very winnable games the rest of the regular season, but there's no telling if you will or will not have to go to resort to that resiliency, resort to that high character, resort to that no-quit attitude in those 3 games that are left. So I think it was a good message that Arizona State sent to itself and maybe sent to the rest of the Pac-12 that it's not a team that's going to go down easily.
So more specifically, the offensive line really struggled, which essentially affected Kelly's performance as well. What will they have to do to improve their performance this week?
Well, I think a lot of time with defensive line play, we talked a lot about this during the season, sometimes really the caliber of opponent that determines how well or how bad you're going to do on the defensive line. And we talked about this last week before the Utah game, that we felt that the Utah defensive line was just as physical as Stanford, Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and as we all know, looking at those games, those are teams that did give Arizona State's offensive line quite a bit of fits. Then when you play teams that get like Washington State, Colorado, with offensive lines that just were not as physical, Arizona State was able to find more success. I think when you look at Oregon State, when you look at them on defense, they maybe kind of remind you more of a Washington State than they do a Stanford. I think they have more talent, but I think when you look at the numbers, they are definitely not up there, and I wouldn't call them necessarily a physical defensive line, and I think they're even less physical than Utah, but may have more talent. So I think Arizona State's offensive line should encounter a team that may be easier to work against, so to speak. I mean, I don't think they should just expect to go and push them 7 yards off the ball every play. But when you look at just the sheer talent or the sheer physicality, I think the offensive line should have a much easier time this week.
Sean Mannion, the Oregon State's quarterback, really likes to throw the ball. What will the defense need to do to put pressure on him and force turnovers?
Well, the Arizona State defensive line right now is playing at a very high level. I mean, really almost going back to the 2012 season where Will Sutton and Carl Bradford looks like they're in the backfield every other play. So he's a quarterback that not only every quarterback you rattle, obviously their performance is going to be affected, but some quarterbacks are able to go to make plays with their feet, like Taylor Kelly. And Sean Mannion actually is not a mobile quarterback. So when you go ahead and put pressure on a quarterback like him, that can pay even more dividends compared to, let's say, putting pressure on a more mobile quarterback like a Brent Hundler or even Taylor Kelly for that matter. So that's one thing they have to go ahead and keep in mind. I think they have to go and make sure that he doesn't fool the defense with their play action, because Todd Graham said earlier today that it's easy to overlook Oregon State's running game, but that's actually a running game that really can go ahead and open up everything when it comes to their passing offense. So that's another thing they need to look at. But I think Arizona State's defensive line, the way they're pressuring the quarterback the last several weeks, if they can go ahead and keep that intensity level. I mean, the guys like Gannon Conaway and Devon Coleman, who sometimes get less attention because of Will Sutton and Carl Bradford, but actually able to do more because they don't see double teams like those other two. If those guys can play at the level they're playing lately, I think they could definitely make Sean Mannion's life really hard. And again, with him not being a mobile quarterback, if you can go in and just shut down the passing game, you can go a long way in trying to secure a win.
Brandon Cooks, a proven rusher and receiver, will be a target of the ASU defense. What will they need to do to make sure he doesn't have a successful game this week?
Well, Brandon Cooks, if you look at film, a lot of his a lot of his plays are via the screenplay. And with Arizona State's defense, that can be somewhat of a predicament, because as we know, that his defense is very, very aggressive. And usually when you're very aggressive, the hot routes or the screen routes are the ones that the offense can really go ahead and make you, regret that aggressiveness, so to speak. So I think that the aggressiveness has to be curtailed to some extent. And the linebackers group, a group which, aside from Chris Young, has really been up and down all year, is really going to have to be disciplined in their reads. Especially I'm looking for a player like Anthony Jones, we interviewed earlier. We all know he had a very up and down season so far. But from that spur position, he may be the primary tackler on that second level, if you will, to go ahead and make sure Brandon Cooks gets the 3-yard gain and not the 13 or the 30-yard gain. So that's one thing that you really have to make sure about Brandon Cooks. Another thing to keep in mind is that you really need good play from both of your cornerbacks, because Osan Arabo and Robert Nelson are not going to switch places most likely when Brandon Cooks goes from one side of the field to another. So both of them really have to be on their game, and obviously a lot of safety help. Maybe times you need to go ahead and bracket, let alone double team Brandon Cooks, and that's where the safeties, I would say, especially Damaris Randall, really need to come to play. It's going to be a team effort. I mean, he's not the best wide receiver in the nation for no reason. So really, I mean, we talk about screenplay, talk about plays down the field. Arizona State defense is going to have to be very, very disciplined and really on their toes every time as the play goes his way.
So what are your expectations for this Sun Devil team back at home after back-to-back away games, and what is your final score prediction?
There's a lot of times where I predicted a shootout and it never happened, and then it actually still resulted in a win for ASU. So this is another game I'm going to predict a shootout. I think Oregon State's offense is just way too talented to go ahead and really shut down and keep to 20, 25 points. But we all know that Arizona State plays very well at home. And again, I think they showed in these last two games against Washington State and Utah, even though those wins are very different from each other, they showed right now that they're still a team that's really clicking on all cylinders. I mean, the offense, even though it sputtered against Utah, obviously for the most part, the fourth quarter when they need to turn it on, they did. And the defense as well. Again, we talk about Carl Bradford and Will Sutton. They are playing closer and closer to that 2012 form. And I think they definitely have the capability to go ahead and ignite the whole defense to really slow down the Oregon State offense. I don't know if you really can shut them down. There's just way too many playmakers over there. So I'm predicting a 41-31 score, a win for Arizona State. Again, I just think they're just playing at a very high level right now on both sides of the ball. One thing to keep in mind is that Oregon State, just like Utah, just like Washington State, is coming off a bye. And against Washington State, I don't think they threw anything at ASU they haven't seen, but that definitely was not the case versus Utah. So that's one thing that you have to keep in mind. It may be a win just like Utah, where the first half you're still trying to adjust everything they're throwing at you, but with halftime adjustments, you can go and prevail in the end.
Awesome. And again, with publisher Rabino, I'm Rebecca Winn for Devil's Digest.